about the way in which disruptions are occurring across the globe, Asia's been at the heart of that. And in many respects, the shift in economic activity is the most disruptive force that the world is seeing. That shift has been occurring for quite some time now. In fact, if you look over the last 50 years and you look at the economies that have outperformed the United States over that period of time, most of them are in Asia. And if you actually roll forward and think about what's going to happen, that's just going to continue. I think the rate at which it will continue is going to differ. And it may be the case that China, which has been the horsepower of most of this change, will give way to India playing an increasingly important role. But nevertheless, this shift in economic activity towards Asia, it's going to continue. I think the second thing that we should reflect on when we think about disruptive forces 10 years from now, it's the way in which globalization has meant that the impact of data and the way in which data has started to flow will really ensure that service-based flows become increasingly important as opposed to just goods. And that's one of the reasons why, if you look at trade south-south versus north-south, south-south, i.e. trade within Asia, has gone from being 8% of the trade in that part of the world in 1995, now it's 20%. 20%. That's a huge increase, and it's only going to gather steam. And the third thing, of course, as we look 10 years out, technology. Technology development. How is AI going to play out? How is Asia in particular going to play? And I think what we're seeing, yes, largely out of China, but also out of India, is we're seeing Asia disruptors who are coming in and making sure that this is going to be a change that sees Asian players with a really important voice in the way in which technology will disrupt. So the way in which technology developments are going to continue to impact this region and then the world is only going to gain force. It's very tempting to think you can future-proof. What I think you can do is actually prepare for different outcomes and be ready to recognize that some of the forces that are happening are going to play in a very different way than we may expect. But if I had to pick a few ways in which I think CEOs should really be focused, the first is the impact of AI and automation. The net effect of that is a fundamental change in what it means to lead. And why is that true? It's true because the way in which business will be conducted is going to change. If you think about the jobs we have today, 60% of those jobs will see more than 30% of the tasks fundamentally transformed. If those tasks are transformed, it means the way in which your labor force, if you're a CEO, conducts itself has to change. We often talk about reskilling. It's a fancy word for saying the way we do things has to change. And that means I think we need to learn from some of the ways in which companies are seeking to take workers who, for example, in retail, have been at the checkouts, which will no longer exist because people won't need them, how they're going to operate if they're in warehouses, figuring out which products go where, working with machinery to do that. Automation is going to fundamentally transform the role of service and how service plays through, because the easy tasks will be automated. The task of care and giving care, that's harder to automate. That's going to need more people. So shifts within jobs, shifts across jobs, fundamentally different challenge for CEOs to think about how they ensure their labour forces are equipped for this challenge. I think one of the other things CEOs are going to have to really think hard about is their supply chains. Where are they located? How are they organised? In this world in which Asia, of course, will continue to be the economic power for growth, but there's going to be differential performance within Asia. We are going to see geopolitical boundaries mean that global supply and the notion of a global supply chain is going to give way, I think, to a supply chain that is optimized irregardless of what happens in the political front. And that actually means more local development, more local capability. That's a big shift. That's a very big shift. A third change, if Asia and the world is really going to be able to continue to grow at a time when demography is actually leading to populations contracting and working populations contracting, we need to think about the whole labour force. Gender parity isn't just a nice thing to do, it's at the heart of the growth debate. It's what's going to allow economies to regain their growth trajectory. Japan will not grow if more women do not come into the workforce. China has obviously got a declining labour population within the next 5 or so years. That means even more women need to enter the workforce. And you can go right across Asia and find that gender parity becomes a necessity for economic growth. Which leads me to the last point. I've talked about technology, automation. That could be a great force for good, or it could be a source of reinforcing some of the differences that exist, some of the inequalities that exist. If the digital divide grows even further, that's going to mean the gap between the digital haves and the digital have-nots is going to be the defining issue of our time. I think that's a massively important topic that CEOs have a role to play to ensure that technology is accessible to all. Regulators have a role to play to ensure that there's a playing field which allows technology to be distributed and for people to have access. And of course, the public sector needs to help ensure people are literate, educated, able to use the technology tools that are out there. So there's a lot for CEOs to do in a time of great change.